press conference today, Governor-elect Jeff Landry spoke on what people can expect from his transition team. The 14 councils on his transition team will provide him with policy guidance ahead of Inauguration Day. According to our media partners at the Louisiana Illuminator, at least 5 of the council co-chairs are campaign donors of Landry. For instance, we know that shipbuilding magnate Boise Bollinger will co-chair the New Orleans Council, and Eddie Risponi, a businessman who lost in a 2019 runoff to current Governor John Bel Edwards, will co-chair the K-12 Education Council. When asked if the meetings or full membership of these councils would be public, here's what Landry had to say.
The final reports that the committees put together, which would outline major areas of concerns that those committees come up with in state government to be made public. But until then, we want those people to be able to deliberate in privacy so that we get honesty and transparency amongst those committee members.
Again, the councils will create policy recommendations used to guide Landry's agenda as governor. But because they are not official government bodies, they are not required to conduct business in public. Landry also put out a call to anyone wanting to work in his administration. Applications for that are on his website at oneteam.la.